After having commented on the woodfather's shop tour, he suggested that I should do one of my own. So here we are, a shop tour of my garage workshop. As you see, it's only a single car garage, and I don't get to use all of it. The first item noticed is my table saw, supplied by Axminster, well-known company in the UK. I did have some problems with the original version where the blade was wobbling slightly as I moved it up and down. I complained to Axminster and they said, sorry sir, that's part of the design of this particular machine. But 2 years later, when I took it up with them again, they said they'd changed the design, and they were very kind enough to say if I took my old machine back, they would give me full credit so I could buy the newer version, although slightly more expensive, doesn't exhibit the wobble. To be able to use it, I usually have to draw it out of the garage somewhat. And there we are, all ready to go. Sitting on the top is my jig for cutting finger joints. This is a design I found on the internet. I modified it slightly by adding a turns counter, and it works with my 1/8 inch blade, and turns to adjust for the fingers, and all one requires is a list of the number of turns for each joint. My first example was this old port wine bottle box, and I used that as my first test piece for doing finger joints. This is how the saw would normally be used, obviously with the dust collector pipe connected to it. But moving into the garage, on the right you see a step ladder that I use to get up into the loft. Beside that are a few long clamps, and then down below is my router station made by Benchdog. There are drawers beneath, and in those we have a collection of router bits, my pneumatic nailer, and some bits for the table saw. Hanging on this wall here is a thing for doing angled legs, and some spring clamps. The router is mounted on a wheeled base, came off a very large A3 printer that I bought, and then we have some cupboards that were in the garage when I first moved in, and to which I've added on the front some spanners, a collection of tapes, chisels on a magnetic holder, screwdrivers of various sizes, and a set of edge clamps which look very good, but I've never actually used them yet. Below that is a small metal vise, and what is that on the wall? That's my Craig case for my Craig jointer, and then my sander, and then various bits of junk sitting on the bench, a little heater to try and keep me a little warm in the winter, various drills, and some Forstner bits, more drills and punches and things in cases lurking in the corner. Moving round onto the wall that divides the garage in two are my larger collection of clamps and a few odd little ones, and then various collection of tools hung up on the wall. The original tool rack I had before I really got into serious woodworking. Some more rasps, some various coloured paints, and a small bandsaw which I'm currently waiting for a fitment to enable me to do curvy cuts. Beneath the bench with the vise is a small set of drawers containing sanding discs and sanding materials, and also some of my stuff from my electronics days. A couple of stands and a chest which contains various odds and ends, tools, things that one accumulates over the years and thinks may come in useful one day. Underneath, a few more clamps, and in the drawers below there are some strips of metal that again may come in useful sometime. What is, I suppose, supposed to be my main workbench is actually an old office desk, but it was a bit low, so I made a top to go on it to lift it up a little higher level. It's quite convenient since underneath I can store boxes of screws and my battery powered drills. Coming round on the bench, a lamp, up above a roll of paper, some very handy clamps, very useful devices. They're automatic sizing clamps, and hanging from the ceiling some older saws and a couple of jigs for putting hinges on with a router. The best saw I have, I think, is this Japanese saw. This one hanging here and this smaller one, I think, are the most useful ones. Cutting on a pull stroke means you can do straight lines much easier than on the push stroke. On the top shelf up there, various paint tins, some fillers, a few odd tools, putty knife. But then we come round to my bench drill. As you can see, it's slightly different to most pillar drills, in as much as it can be the top can be adjusted forwards and backwards so that you can get quite a deep throat, if that's not too saucy a term. Underneath the bench I created some drawers, and in there I've got store of smaller routers, drills, clamps, and the chargers for some of my devices. Drawer below, another router, another sander, a jigsaw, and in the bottom a power saw, power planer, another router, and a power sander. So I've got quite a collection. Oh, there's also an angle grinder there, a mallet, and an electrical version of a nailer. Moving on past the drill, I have my miter saw. This is a DeWalt version that uses the sliding rails, but I've got my eye on the Bosch one that uses the zigzag joints, so it doesn't have to move backwards. At the moment, as you see, the saw is mounted on a little bench that protrudes out into the workshop. It's rather inconvenient, but it's what I had to do. Above that, various spanners, various bits and pieces for fixing, some raw plugs, loads of electrical stuff, stuff for TV cables, and then some little trays that contain nuts and bolts, all sorts of things. Some spare batteries for one of my drills, a couple of very long series drills. On the back wall, more spanners, and as you see, pretty well every available space is taken up with things hanging. I could really do with some more space. Car charging, battery charging leads, my hedge trimmer, and more nuts, screws and bolts, all sitting in some racks at one time, and now they're sort of hidden away so they don't get used so much. Passed over my sander, which is sitting there next to the dust collection system, which can be connected up to either the table saw or to my planer, thicknesser, jointer, whatever it's called in the different countries. And sitting underneath, again on a movable trolley, are boxes of screws of various types. Under the saw bench of various bits of wood, it's always a problem to know what to do with the bits that you cut off. They may come in useful, so they should be stored, but eventually it gets to be too many. And then there's a stand for work for use with the different saws to support boards as they're being cut. Going back towards the ceiling, up on the top of the cupboard there, you can see my father's old jack plane and a number 4 Stanley given to me by a friend, and a couple of clamps, I think designed by Matthias. Various things hanging from the ceiling. My power cap, which was originally used when I was doing wood turning, but is very useful when I'm working with MDF. A couple of jigs, my very first attempt at doing a finger joint jig for just 1/8 inch fingers using my blade. There's a jig for doing resawing with my other bandsaw, which you have yet to see. On the back wall there is hanging the jig I use for making picture frames. There's a lady who lives in the village, does lots of pictures, and I supply her with frames to use in when she puts them up in the gallery. And there's another jig there for putting splines into joints. And then that black hole up there leads to the loft, where there's various odds and bits that have accumulated over the years, stored away, probably never to be seen again, including my skis. Moving past this sign that I just had to do a repair on, we come to the dividing wall that shields the garage from the domestic stuff. And in here we have the washing machine, the boiler, and on the left here the refrigerator. The only thing of mine really that's in here is my ShopTour domino. A wonderful device which is simplistic for making wonderful joints, but even I proved that you can use it incorrectly. If we swing round past the door into the kitchen, we come to another door that my wife suggested I hack into the side wall of the garage to get to my other place where I store tools, which is called the workshop, and we'll come to that now. The workshop, which I built on the side of the house in the back access alley, it's 24 feet long, but it's only 4 feet 6 wide, so it tends to have the nickname of the railway carriage. It does serve the purpose of storing a few extra tools, for instance my wood turning lathe, my bandsaw, a grinder for sharpening chisels, and a workshop station designed by Stumpy Nubs, which I use for keeping all my chisels and planes blades sharp. There's also a little saw which I don't use very much, a couple of dining room chairs, and sitting on the back there is an oscilloscope which reflects some of my electrical background. Some of my longer pieces of wood are stored up on the ceiling, and with the step ladders there's also a couple of pieces that are waiting to be made into a garden planter box. Under the bench there are various odd bits stored away, but including a vacuum which is linked to the bandsaw, so that when the bandsaw is switched on, the vacuum operates immediately and hopefully keeps the sawdust down. Also under the bench is my little air compressor, which I use mainly to drive my pneumatic nailers. And besides that, I now have my very tidy stock of materials. They've only recently been tidied up like that. Previously they were all along the side wall to the right, making it almost impossible for me to get into the workshop. But the last part of the workshop is devoted to garden tools, my mower, and a very useful patio heater. Well, there you are. That's my workshop tour. As you can see, I've got a number of tools, machines, devices, etc. There's lots of other stuff hidden away that has not been shown. The only thing I'm really missing is anywhere to work. I do envy especially our American cousins who have these great big double and triple garages which they convert into workshops, whereas I've got just about half of a single UK garage. But I managed to get a few things made, taking up woodworking since I retired about 12 years ago, and I've been amazed to find that I can afford to buy these various machines and get on with making things. Our lounge is now filled up with as much oak furniture as it can take, so I'm having to look for other avenues to expend my talents. My wife says enough is enough. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the tour, and I'll be interested to see your comments below.